Hosted by Jason Bryan and providing the latest insights on telecoms trends from around the world. This is ROCCO Radio.
You're listening to Eureka, brought to you by ROCCO Radio in association with the Innovators Research 2020. These days, the temperature is rising on the need for more innovative wholesale international roaming processes. And right now, there's no clearer opportunity for improving the roaming supply chain than DLTs and blockchain. If you think about it, the SDR is one of the oldest cryptocurrencies. So what more can be done with processes, many of which are over 2 decades old, to make it easier for the ecosystem to become more efficient? Speaking with associations, operators, vendors, and professionals outside of our immediate industry, ROCCO is trying to learn what other industries are using blockchain for and how it might help us. Which is why, on a recent trip to Australia, I was lucky enough to meet Moira Scerri, Lecturer and Researcher of Operations and Supply Chain Management at the University of Technology in Sydney. In her interview, Moira describes her career path and how it led to her current role at UTS, and confirmed how it seems certain blockchain will have a strong role to play on our industry in the future.
When you've got that sort of economics behind a technology, it's only time that it will take off, time and leadership. And I think this is one of the biggest challenge is organisations are implementing it for themselves, but actually what we need is leadership to bring it, the whole supply chain together.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here in Sydney, Australia, at the UTS, University of Technology, Sydney. My first time in Australia, and such a pleasure to meet Moira Scerri, as in the drink, yes. she told me, who is a PhD lecturer, Operations and Supply Chain Management. Yeah. Hi, Moira.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for interviewing me.
You're very welcome. I'm very excited to be interviewing my first university professor, actually. And especially since your background is on blockchain, and that's very, very exciting for our industry. So before we get into that, can you tell me something more about you and your background?
Yeah, sure. So I actually came to academia from industry. I spent the majority of my career in the travel and tourism industry as a practitioner in that sector, and then moved across to IT and was responsible for large-scale industry and global changes in technology for the travel and tourism industry. My love for technology sort of started there, and I've carried that forward into my PhD and the work that I'm doing, the research work that I'm doing here at the university.
So when would that have been then, when you started in that industry?
I started in the industry some time ago, maybe 30 years ago.
Wow.
I finished my PhD in 2015, so
right.
Yeah, almost 4 years now.
So what made you make the change to academia?
Interesting, because I used to go out and sell technology, and all of the things with technology, you'll increase your productivity, you'll have cost reduction, efficiencies. But I saw that the change process was sometimes quite long, and so I couldn't really put my hand on my heart to say, well, you'll get these, you'll invest this amount of money and get this return on investment within this period of time. So I decided that I would research productivity in service and network-based firms, and my research was predominantly about measuring intangibles and how do we convert some measures so that we can understand what happens in the virtual space and in the service space. So that was my interest.
I often dream about being, an educator, and it's a very worthy and it's very nice feeling I would expect to have. To move from, let's say, an industry where everybody's just thinking about making money to one where we're thinking about how we can influence people and how they will evolve and change the world in the future.
Yeah, I've always taught right through my career, so always did sort of practical teaching. So I worked in the vocational education sector to teach sort of practical skills, and now having transitioned to industry where I taught people skills and knowledge that existed, but now in academia where you actually create knowledge and get to diffuse that is quite exciting. So exciting for me anyway.
So can you tell us a couple of things that you're working on at the moment to give us a feel for what your role is?
Yeah, sure. So I guess my research has now been, around the digital, new technologies in industry. Sort of three distinct projects that I'm working with, and I work with a team of researchers as well, is looking at additive manufacturing, so 3D printing, and what's the impact of 3D printing on the supply chain of medical and surgical devices. Another one is looking at remote monitoring or remote patient monitoring and what impact that could have on redesigning the health system and unlocking some of the potential that's in there, particularly with pharmacies being able to take on much more of a preventative role and a proactive role rather than a reactive role, and changing their business models. And then of course there's blockchain. I've been looking at cryptocurrency and what's the impact of a cryptocurrency for being able to provide a global supply chain currency rather than currencies that are bound by national borders. So that's one thing. And also, what's the impact of blockchain in specific industry verticals? So we're looking at beef ledger, things like fast-moving consumer goods, and health services, and hopefully telcos.
So how did you get started in blockchain then? Because it's a very buzzy topic, isn't it? You hear about it and you think, well, my first impression is you think of cryptocurrencies and you think then, oh, is this something that's really going to be sustainable? How did you get into blockchain?
Yeah, so in my industry career, I actually set up an electronic payment system for the travel and tourism industry. So international payments specifically, were dear to my heart. We were looking to streamline payments. So Australia, in fact, was one of the first markets back in 1999. An Australian travel company used the electronic funds transfer to be able to direct debit travel agents and credit their suppliers. So from that perspective, they were one of the first companies, I think globally, to be able to bring a two-sided market together. In 2000, it went from that organisation to become an industry-wide payment solution. And so there was lots of changes in terms of security, making it a much more open system rather than a closed network based payment solution. And I was very involved in that. And we became part of Amadeus, and Amadeus is a global technology company. And they were interested in the technology and how it might be able to facilitate international payments. So a group of some technologists, bankers. I worked with some bankers at Citibank, and Money Direct was the name of the business. So we actually developed an electronic payment system where we could facilitate efficient and cost-effective payments for international. So we leveraged each of the local banking networks, and we would do things like netting of payments and bulking of payments and transferring to different markets and things like that. So what started off as a bit of an experiment, we sort of built a business model around payments that we thought would be low value, payments of around $250. The average payment transaction ended up being $3,500. So we could see that the whole thing had huge potential. And so once cryptocurrency came in, it was like, well, why couldn't cryptocurrency provide a similar sort of solution to an industry for being able to facilitate those payments? And also the travel industry's not, when we calculate airfares using what we call neutral units of construction. And so there's already a mechanism in place to be able to have this virtual currency per se, to be able to facilitate, and that's what the airlines use to facilitate payments between themselves, irrespective of which airline, which country, etc. So the whole notion of having a global payment system or a virtual payment system or currency for an industry was not outside my realm of understanding. And so it's like, well, if that can happen for one industry, why can't it happen for other industries such as food and beverage or anything really.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking that's especially relevant to the industry that we work in telecoms and roaming. So what kind of challenges did you face in trying to introduce that? There's recently been some stabilization of cryptocurrencies, there's been some standardization. Were those challenges that you faced?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is people's understanding of cryptocurrency. And a lot of people see cryptocurrency as an asset rather than a currency. And so, bridging the gap between that understanding of, the price is going up, so it's either an asset because you want to hold it and not transact it, is a challenge. But once we actually put that aside and said, let's just look at a currency that is developed and accepted by an industry where the whole purpose is to facilitate the transactions, then it's easy because it has a specific purpose, and the purpose is actually about the transfer of the information rather than the value of the currency itself. It's just a facilitator of information at that point.
So that was a challenge to be able to explain to people. And also one other thing is there enough knowledge and resources in the blockchain world at the moment, would you say? Is it challenging or?
Yeah, I don't think there's enough either knowledge or resources to scale it up. We're just seeing organisations either experiment with blockchain, and we've run a number of case studies in the food and beverage sector where we can see people are using it for specific purpose. So they might experiment to look at transparency, or they might look at it to overcome fraud, or each organisation has a specific strategy or goal for implementing blockchain. Whereas if we had an industry or a large organisation we refer to as a focal firm, bringing the industry along with a specific implementation, then we would see the industry move much quicker in that direction. Yeah.
Bearing in mind what you just said, what kind of recommendations would you have for companies who are starting now to consider how they should be involved in blockchain?
Well, I would think that an organisation who has some sort of influence in an industry should in fact take the lead and look at bringing the industry forward and take that sort of leadership role for that supply chain. And we've seen it before with Walmart taking the lead with the implementation of RFID technology. So there are already precedents out there. We actually just need the leadership to step up and say, well, okay, this is the direction that we want our supply chain to move in, and work across the supply chain to move everyone together to make it a reality, I guess.
Yeah, so in our industry, I think that's where it's starting to happen, that a lot of companies are thinking in private that they need to explore it, and I guess some mobile operators are also doing that. Governments, I heard recently that pretty much the whole of Estonia is using blockchain already. So these are very positive stories. Does it seem to you that it's inevitable that processes will move to blockchain?
Oh, absolutely. I think the efficiencies that they can deliver, and I'll just give you an example. In the research that we did, we just developed a number of scenarios, simple scenarios. Let's have a look if somebody transfers $50,000 to an international market every week. So transfer 1 week in one currency, transfer it back the other. Over a year, it cost them 94%, right? So by the time they paid their, the spread on the international transaction, the bank fees, that whole amount was virtually taken up in bank fees. So when you've got that sort of economics behind a technology, it's only time that it will take off, time and leadership. And I think this is one of the biggest challenge is organisations are implementing it for themselves, but actually what we need is leadership to bring the whole supply chain together, because it's the supply chain efficiency that's really going to deliver the benefits in terms of cost. So yeah, just an organisational change is maybe good for experimentation and learning, but for it to gain real impact, it's the supply chain that needs to be connected.
And which industries would you say we should look at who are leading in blockchain development right now? Is it the banks? Is it financial sectors?
Yeah, we actually have, in Australia, we've got a number of, the cotton industry, Commonwealth Bank, Wells Fargo Bank, and some organisations in China using the Internet of Things, blockchain, smart contracts. They've brought together a range of technologies as a prototype, but it's not a prototype anymore. It's working. So they're sort of embedding that, being able to facilitate what we refer to as a distributed autonomous organisation. So organisations that run on computer codes, basically, with smart contracts and blockchain underpinning most of that.
One thing that I guess people are thinking about, because this is so new and there's so much transparency in public blockchains, for example, is the privacy issue. And then, of course, when you think of privacy, you immediately think of the regulations which a country has. From an Australian perspective, have those been challenges in this market, would you say?
Yeah, they have, and it's something that the government has been looking at. And the government actually set up a digital group, and that government digital group is merged now with the Blockchain Association. So those two things are coming together. But when my interest is not so much in the consumer side of things, more in the business to business, connections, and where efficiencies can be gained there. And if we use cryptocurrency as an example, or virtual currencies as an example, in the past, the transaction, because it's locked up in a bank and you've got access to all your bank account details and things like that, was under lock and key. But if we look at the cryptocurrency being a facilitator of information, and that's on the blockchain, all you're doing is seeing whether this transaction has been paid or not. You don't have access to all of the other aggregated information. It's not secure. It's just simply, here is an exchange of goods. Has the associated payment been facilitated, been paid or not? So it will fundamentally change the way that information is shared, the sort of information it's shared, the purpose that it's shared for, and also where in the organisation that information processing belongs. If it's a payment, a traditional bank payment, it belongs with your accounting and finance. If it's a piece of information, just like an order process or a purchase order, it belongs with the operations people. And so we're actually going to see a lot of the change move from one part of a lot of the processing move from one part of the organisation to another part of the organisation, and that's a disruptive element within businesses.
So in terms of UTS, what's your, vision for blockchain and how you can support it in the coming years?
I've worked at the intersection of different industries. So when I was in the travel and tourism industry, I brought in IT. I also brought in payments and IT. So always at the intersection of different industries. And I think here I can play the same sort of role, where we've got education across the different industry sectors, be it the cryptocurrency or the payments versus each of the industry verticals that we're currently working in. So we've sort of got a bit of a structure that we can leverage our learning from one industry and transport it to another, etc. So sort of doing that cross-pollination. Yeah.
So bearing in mind all of this experience that you've gathered in this area, any recommendations that you would have to individuals who want to learn more about blockchain?
I think pick an area that you want to focus on, like an application of blockchain, be it transparency or fraud detection or crypto payments, whatever it is, and focus on one industry to get the depth of knowledge in that area, and then it becomes transportable to other industries. So take a very fine line or a thin thread and just focus on that, because otherwise it can be, you could find yourself all over the place. With the opportunities. So.
And one final question, what do you wish that you would have known before you started out along this blockchain path?
I think it's that difference that, whilst it's called a cryptocurrency, it's being treated as an asset. So sort of building that bridge between, is what it's called really what it is? So we started off going, it's a currency, but then actually wasn't being transacted, and it's very different. So just sort of getting that understanding took some time, and I could have fast-tracked that, I think. Yeah.
I see. Moira, it's been a real pleasure and an inspiration to talk to you. I think that, this is such a new area for our industry, and there's, like you say, very few real professionals who are digging into it and really, let's say, enthusiastic right now. But I think there will be.
Yeah.
And guidance like yours is extremely helpful to us. So thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you. Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Look out for more Eureka podcasts in the coming weeks. If you're an M&O, you might be interested in taking part in our Innovators 2020 research, where you get the opportunity to rate vendors on their product and service innovation. It's quick and easy to complete the confidential survey and cast your vote on which vendors are innovating the most. Until next time, this is Jason Bryan, and you've been listening to Eureka from ROCCO Radio.